It's time we talk about kids in Scientology. This is going to be a deep dive into Scientology's views and practices when it comes to children. We're going to be looking at what Scientology says about Sea Org staff that are kids. We're going to be looking at L. Ron Hubbard's own writings about children and parenting. We're going to be talking about the new courses that Scientology have released for children, which is what they're calling a golden age for kids. And most importantly, in my mind, we're going to be talking about what the UK government and courts here in the UK have said about the practice of Scientology in relation to children. I want to preface this by saying freedom of belief is a thing. You have the freedom to choose whatever religion or spirituality or faith or whatever system you want to believe in. And I have no issue with that. If you want to be a Scientologist and you want to believe in what L. Ron Hubbard wrote, be my guest. You have every right to do so. What I have a problem with is the behaviors and the practices that lead to harm. And in the case of Scientology, the practice of Scientology is harmful to children, as we shall see in the course of this video. Children, by definition, cannot consent. So they may very well want to believe in Scientology, but to force a child to practice Scientology or to practice Scientology on a child is something I have an issue with, because they cannot consent, because they are under the age of consent. And by practicing Scientology on a child, you are harming them. That is not just my view, that is the view of the UK government and the courts here in the UK. We're going to be talking about that, but I just wanted to start off by making that clear differentiation, the delineation. You can believe that man is an immortal spiritual being, be my guest. You can believe that a child is a spiritual being that's had millions of lives before and will have millions more, but to treat that child differently than you would anybody else because of that belief, that is then when a belief becomes a practice or a behavior, and that's where there needs to be greater scrutiny. You can believe your child is God, but to make that child do some things, for example, auditing or ethics conditions, because that's your belief, that is a problem. We're going to be talking about this. It's going to be a deep dive, so I hope you guys are strapped in. And I also want to start by giving a little bit of a trigger warning. We're not going to be discussing child SA or giving graphic details or accounts of violence or harm being done to children or anything like that. But we are going to be talking about this topic of children in Scientology, which some people may find difficult or may not want to talk about or listen to. So if you feel you may be triggered or you might find this hard, do give this a skip or, watch it at your own discretion, because I wouldn't want anybody to be triggered by this. There are a lot of people in this community who were children in Scientology who may find this difficult to watch. So viewer discretion is advised. Before we crack on, let's look at some of these comments. Danielle Chamberlain in the house, and a perfect example of a child in Scientology. Hello. What's all this then? Thank you for stopping by, Danielle. We have Loic saying, evening, eh? Good evening. Lupita waving the hand there. Bok Buddy, good evening, Alex. Thank you so much. New year, new name. I call messing with kids and vulnerable adults and the elderly. This is desperate and unconscionable. Absolutely, I agree. Mystic Pebbles here. I've already heard from someone under the radar that they are under pressure to get their kids onto courses. Such a difficult position to be in. 100% we're going to be talking about that. Danielle here. Children are like sponges, therefore can very easily be brainwashed long term. Bok Buddy, if auditing a child isn't bad enough, the thought of running the purification rundown should be considered abuse and investigations started. Absolutely. Haggis Basher is also in the house. Thank you for joining. So let's start off by talking about these new kids courses. It has been reported on my blog, Scientology Business, and on Tony Ortega's Substack, and in other videos on Mark and Claire Headley's channel, for example, Blown for Good. Chris Shelton has done a thing about this. But just to recap, for those of you who don't know, Scientology like to have these golden ages. There was the golden age of tech, then the golden age of knowledge, then the golden age of tech phase 2, then the golden age of admin, and now we're in the golden age of children. Scientology have repackaged a bunch of their courses and published them as kids-specific courses. There are 2 sets of courses, and I'm going to read you some of the titles that I've got here. For younger kids, How to Be Happy, Honesty, Start, Change, Stop, Confront Drills, Assists, How the Mind Works, and so on. And for adolescents, you've got 21 Steps to Happiness, How Control Works, Honesty and Survival, Communication Drills, How to Do Assists, Understanding the Mind, The 8 Dynamics, The Tone Scale, Parts of Man, so on. Essentially, these courses teach the very basic fundamentals of what Scientology is. And I don't see the harm in teaching kids about different religions. I remember doing religious studies at school and learning about Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, and so on, Judaism. I think it's great for kids to be educated on different faith systems. And on the face of it, these courses are just a basic introduction to Scientology for children. The problem I have is the reason these courses have been released. Scientology haven't released these courses to schools and educational environments to try and educate non-Scientology kids on what Scientologists believe. It's structured as a course to indoctrinate children of current Scientologists and get them onto services, get them to become paying Scientologists doing steps on the bridge to total freedom. So the reason they're doing it is problematic. The content of the actual books themselves, although they haven't been published yet, so we haven't seen it, based on their titles and the fact that they're written by L. Ron Hubbard, who died 40 years ago, and based on the existing volunteer minister booklets, which they seem to be kind of aligned with, we know what's probably in them, and it's just, like I said, the basics of Scientology. However, they're being used as a tool to recruit kids and being used as a tool to get kids in the course room. And this is evidenced by photos that have been published and shared on social media over the last couple of days by Scientologists. Now, these new courses were unveiled at L. Ron Hubbard's birthday event, which happened a couple of weeks ago. March 13th was his birthday. I believe the event took place the day after at Ruth Eckert Hall in Clearwater, Florida. Reclusive leader Dave Miscavige trotted out on stage and gave his 3-hour speech and unveiled these new courses. The event was filmed and it was then broadcast to orgs around the world in a separate local event that they all held. Most of them happened this weekend just gone, like St. Hill. I think some orgs are taking place or they're doing it next weekend. But nonetheless, it's a slow rollout. And over the last few days since this event, there have been photos coming out of how these courses are being implemented. I'm going to share some of those photos with you now. Now, there are pictures of kids in these photos, but I have blurred the faces out because obviously I want to protect the children's privacy. But I would like to note that these photos were shared on social media and in public places, unredacted by their parents. Okay, so their parents clearly think it's okay to share their photos and their faces online, but I have redacted them for the purposes of this stream. This is a photo of a very young kid with fairy wings on walking into the new children's theory course room. Now, lots of orgs around the world have in the past had specific course rooms for children's courses. But what's been happening over the last couple of weeks and months is these orgs have been renovating specifically these course rooms, or they've been creating them anew. Like London, for example, didn't have a children's course room when it was made ideal in 2006. They have now turned one of the course rooms into a course room specifically for these new kids' courses. And this is what one of those course rooms looks like. Children's theory. So they're new delivery spaces specifically for these new courses. Here's a picture of a child reading one of the new books, which is Communication Drills. And some of these have some comments written by a Scientologist, which I think shows the state of mind in Scientology about these courses and how great they are. This one here, love this so much. Next generation, here we go. So it's being sold as an opportunity to get the next generation of Scientologists recruited onto their studies and up the bridge. Now, the reason it's being promoted like this as the next generation is because Scientology is suffering from a major problem at the moment with an aging population. The majority of Scientologists are getting older. They're people who joined in the 60s, 70s, and 80s who perhaps have kids or grandkids that have been raised in Scientology. So the people who are donating lots of money, who are actively going to churches of Scientology around the world, are getting old. The majority of the big donors to Scientology, like Trish Duggan, Tom Cummins, and so on, Tom Cruise, they're all over the age of 60, in some cases over the age of 70 or even 80, like Sheila, who is one of the biggest, if not the biggest donor here in the UK. This generation is very sadly dying off. So they are now pushing, the church this is, getting the kids in the org, because people aren't joining Scientology because there's so much information out there about Scientology online. It's very easy to find out the truth about Scientology. So recruitment has dropped. So what does Miscavige do? He says, let's get the kids in so they can fund the orgs going forward. So it's the next generation. Here's another picture with a quote from L. Ron Hubbard. Today's children will become tomorrow's civilization. I mean, he's not wrong. But we're going to be looking at some of the things L. Ron Hubbard said about children very shortly. It's telling that this is the quote they've chosen to put with this picture and not some of the others. Here, let's uncover these incredible books together. So it's being promoted as an opportunity for children to get together and learn together. What a fun joint activity. Now, this next picture is where it starts to get disturbing. In Scientology, there is a thing called a reg. A reg stands for registrar. It means salesperson. When you finish a course in Scientology, you go and write your success story, you get a certificate. Immediately afterwards, you are sent to the reg. Every org has one or many regs, and their job is to sell you the next course. And this is the quote. And with all this comes a new era of registration. So our young people know what it means to see the reg. And here is a picture of an adult registrar salesperson selling a child their next course. This is why this is a problem. As soon as a child does a course, they now, just like their adult parents have to do, go and see a reg and are sold the next course. Now, children might say, I don't have any money or whatever. The reg's job is to handle those, what they call objections, barriers, stops and barriers. The reg's job is not to take no for an answer. Whatever reason you give as to why you can't pay for the next course, the reg has to find a way around it and a reason to take your money. So if a child was to say, I don't have any money, the reg will go, okay, well, how can we get you some money? Do you get pocket money from your parents? How much do you get? Could you save up, and maybe get your course in a week or two? Or perhaps your parents need a car wash, or there are cars in the car park that need washing. Perhaps you could go and wash some cars for £5, and then you can come back in an hour with enough money for the next course. Whatever it may be, the reg's job is to take money from the kid. So as captioned here by a Scientologist, these courses now mean that children have to go and see the reg, and they will now know what it means to see the reg. This is disgusting. Here's another picture of that child with the lovely fairy wings holding her new course called How the Mind Works. So this is being rolled out internationally, and the fact that children are now being subjected to hard push sales is only just the beginning of why this is a problem. Let's look at some of these comments before we move on to the next part of this stream. Danielle saying, and don't get me started on how wrong it is that children give assist to adults on their own in a room touching adult bodies. Exactly, 100%. We're going to talk about that a bit later on. 49ers fan, did you see that the San Francisco Scientologist on TikTok did an interview on YouTube with the current Scientologist? No, I didn't, but please send me a link. I'll check it out. Amy M, my ex-husband wanted our daughter to go in the free wins with him and have her do courses. That didn't happen on my watch. I talked about that in my interview. Absolutely. Haggis Basher, when I saw the outline on Blown for Good, Danielle, I saw assist and almost threw up. Absolutely. And a comment here from New Year, New Name. I did notice in a video of LA with the volunteers that any community person, to include children, had to sign lots of info as a volunteer and then take volunteer classes. Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about assists a bit later on. Now, what's my personal experience when it comes to being a child in Scientology? I think it's important to note I wasn't raised in Scientology. My parents weren't Scientologists. And I wasn't, 5, 6, 7 years old when I was in Scientology. But I was a child. I joined Scientology when I was 15 years old. I was recruited onto staff. I signed my staff contract and said, I will work for this organization Monday to Friday, 9 till 6. And I did that without parental consent. I didn't have to get my mum or dad to sign something to say they're okay with it. I was asked to, but it didn't actually happen. I joined, as far as I remember, I joined staff and I was working there 5, 6, sometimes even 7 days a week as a kid. Now, I was a kid, yes, but my experience is very different to kids who were raised in Scientology. People who were raised in Scientology had a very different experience, but nonetheless, children in Scientology are harmed, whether you're first or second generation. So let's have a look at what L. Ron Hubbard says about children. Now, this first quote is probably the most trigger warning quote that we're going to bring up here. So I would skip the next 20 or 30 seconds if you are concerned about this. We're not exactly talking about child essay, but it kind of is in a fleeting reference. So skip the next 20 seconds. I'm going to read this out and then move on to the next one if you are worried you're going to be triggered. This is in the book Dianetics, which is known as the Bible in Scientology, the number one book that started it all. L. Ron Hubbard said, the 7-year-old girl who shudders because a man kisses her is not computing. She is reacting to an engram, which is a past traumatic experience in the memory bank. Since at 7, she should see nothing wrong in a kiss, not even a passionate one. L. Ron Hubbard's words, Dianetics. Alrighty, let's move on to the next quote here. Now, this is from the State of Man Congress. It's a lecture that L. Ron Hubbard gave. Let me just rearrange my screen so that people can see this better. If I do that and then that, does that help? And then make it like that. There we go. Okay. So, State of Man Congress, marriage, a lecture L. Ron Hubbard gave in 1960. And if the parents permit them to go on, he's talking about children here. If parents permit them to have to go on having this many overts and withholds. So overts is a bad act. That's something you've done that you shouldn't have done or isn't the best for survival. Not a crime, but, a sin, right? And a withhold is when you don't confess that sin. So if you stole some money from somebody and then you felt guilty about it because you didn't tell them, that would be an overt and then a withhold. If you stole some money from someone and then said, I feel really bad because I stole some money from you, you've gotten rid of the withhold, but it's still an overt, right? So that's what overts and withhold are. And if the parent permits the children to go on having this many overts and withholds against the parents, then they really start making life miserable for everybody. And then they start blowing the family. And by the time they're 16 or 17, this natural phenomenon of their leaving the family will take place. We don't care if they left the family or not. Actually, Roman children, there's a spelling error here in my copying out that says children. Roman children used to get official posts and jobs and get married by the time they were 14 or 15, which is about the right time. You think I'm joking now? I'm not. So L. Ron Hubbard thinks the right time for somebody to start getting a job and responsibilities is the same as Roman children, age 14 or 15. One of the wicked things you can do to a child is to prevent them from starting their life. and I'm not saying that college is totally a bad operation. I didn't say that. I just think so. That's just an opinion. But it does seem that it puts an awful lot of postponement on marriage. So if you want your kids to go to college, to get an education, university, L. Ron Hubbard thinks that it puts an awful postponement on marriage. So going to university stops children from getting married. He thinks going to college, university, is a bad thing, and that you should start working at the age of 14 or 15. Let's look at this next quote here. This is from Child Dianetics, Dianetic Processing for Children, January 1st, 1979. L. Ron Hubbard says, you can actually punish a child physically to defend your rights, so long as he owns what he owns and can contribute to you and work for you. Adults have rights. He ought to know this. A child has growing up as his goal. If an adult doesn't have more rights, why grow up? So he's saying children have more rights. Adults have more rights than children. The child has a duty toward you. He has to be able to take care of you. Not an illusion that he is, but actually. And you have to have patience to allow yourself to be cared for sloppily until, by sheer experience itself, not by your directions, he learns how to do it well. Care for the child? Nonsense. Can you see why this is problematic? Human rights are human rights. They apply to everybody equally, irrespective of age. But L. Ron Hubbard here is saying that children have less rights than adults. L. Ron Hubbard here is saying that there is no problem with a 7-year-old receiving a passionate kiss from an adult. And L. Ron Hubbard here is saying that from the age of 14 or 15, you should start working, and going to university, getting an education is a problem because it stops you getting married. Those are L. Ron Hubbard's words. Now, when it comes to Scientology, there are 3 different types or tiers of Scientologist. There's a public parishioner, there is a staff member, and there is a Sea Org member. Public parishioners are those who pay money to study and do Scientology at an org in a city anywhere in the world. That's your average run-of-the-mill parishioner. A staff member is somebody who signed a 2.5 or a 5-year contract to work for their local city-level church, and they do so either Monday to Friday 9 till 6 or evenings and weekends. There's 2 shifts. Sometimes they work both shifts, but ultimately you have a job outside of Scientology to pay your way, and you volunteer for the time you are on staff, even though it's a full-time contract, and often you're expected to work more than the Monday to Friday 9 till 6. Then you have the Sea Organization, which is the lifetime commitment, the billion-year contracts. Everybody who works at St. Hill, Scientology's UK headquarters, are all members of the Sea Organization. Sea Org members work 7 days a week, all day, every day, with no time off. They are provided communal berthing and food, accommodation, and a weekly stipend of just £50 in return for their lifetime of service. So Sea Org members run the management and the upper levels and the big bases like St. Hill. Now, as it currently stands, from my experience when I was in Scientology, children were not permitted in the Sea Organization. When I was on staff, you had to be over the age of 16, which is still a child in the UK, but 18 is officially when you're an adult. But nonetheless, under the age of 16, you weren't allowed in the Sea Organization. In the past, however, children very much were allowed in the Sea Organization, irrespective of age. I don't know if things have changed since then. It is possible that children have been recruited into the Sea Org since then. But when I was on staff, you couldn't be in the Sea Org unless you were over the age of 16. But that doesn't mean you couldn't be a staff member. You could sign up to work like I did at the Church of Scientology in London under the age of 18. But what does Scientology actually say themselves now about children in the Sea organization? This is the Church of Scientology London's website. This is their FAQ. And it's very lengthy. We're not going to read the whole thing here. But essentially, it tells a white lie here. It says the Sea organization is a relatively new religious order founded in 1967, and until 1976 it was based on seagoing vessels with no small children on board. Now, this is a lie because there are a number of children who were on the flagship Apollo with L. Ron Hubbard. Danielle Chamberlain, who's in the chat, is an example of one of them. Janice Gillum Grady, who wrote the book The Commodore's Messenger. She served L. Ron Hubbard directly as one of her first one of his first messengers. She was a young child. And indeed, the policy letters we're going to look at very shortly will contradict this statement here. But Scientology's official line is there were no children on board the ships, even though there are pictures of children on board the ship. Anyway, when the Sea organization moved to land in 1976, it had no experience with children, but as members bore children, the order provided facilities to accommodate them. After 10 years of experience with children, by 1986, it had become apparent that the duties of a member of a Sea Org were not compatible with raising children. For example, Sea Org members must be free to travel on short notice and extended periods, which you can't balance with parenting children. Hence, in 1986, the policy was established that Sea Org members desiring children would be granted a leave of absence for the order until their children reached majority. So, therefore, if you're in the Sea Org and you get pregnant, you have to leave the Sea Org because you can't have kids in the Sea Org or get an abortion. This does not mean the individual is in any way no longer a member of the church, so they leave the Sea Org, they can come back, blah, blah, blah. For Sea Org members who had children before the policy of the religious order changed in 1986, school facilities were built to properly educate and provide for the children. By way of example, for several years, the Church of Scientology International operated private boarding schools for the children of Sea Org members in Riverside and Los Angeles counties. The Sea Org similarly provided schooling for the children of Sea Org members in Florida and New York, as well as facilities outside the United States. This is what was called the Cadet Organization. Now, the Cadet Org had a registered school here in the UK, down in Crowborough, where the Sea Org berthing is in Sussex, and that school officially closed down in 2016. So until 2016, Scientology was still providing educational services for children of Sea Org members under the guise of the Cadet Organization. Each child who attended those schools was sent there at the specific request of his or her parents. Today, if an individual with minor age children wishes to join the Sea Organization, the children must qualify for the Sea Org and wish to join on their own determinism. The minimum age of Sea Org members is generally, not is, as a matter of rule and policy cannot be changed. It says it's generally the minimum age in any state or county that a person is legally permitted to work. So they're admitting here that it's not always the case 100% of the time in every city and every country in which they operate. Children cannot join the Sea Org until they reach the age that they're allowed to work. It's saying generally it's the rule of law. When you can start working, you can join the Sea Org. Generally. Not every time. The Church of Scientology adheres to all child labour laws, and no underage Sea Org members are permitted to perform tasks or to work hours longer than permitted by law. So it doesn't say here, underage children are not allowed to join the Sea Org. It's saying underage Sea Org members are not allowed to do certain things. Minors are permitted to voluntarily join the Sea Organization with the consent of a parent or a guardian approved by the parents. So if you've got two parents and one of them says, I don't want my kid joining the Sea Org, but the other one says, yeah, that's fine, that kid can join the Sea Organization. They just have to have one parent consenting to it. Once in the Sea Organization, if the minor's parents are also not members of the Sea Org, the minor must then also have an assigned guardian approved by their parents. Schooling is provided at Sea Org installations for minor Sea Org members who still need to complete educational requirements. These are minor Sea Org members who are otherwise of an age whereby they are permitted to work, generally from 16 to 18 years of age. Where local laws regulate the number of hours a minor may work, their schedules are adjusted accordingly. Each jurisdiction is different. Schooling is provided for the legally required number of hours. So, Scientology here are saying they do permit underage Sea Org members, and that's still a thing. Which is outrageous, because even though they're saying underage kids have to abide by the rules and there's restrictions on working hours and so on, they are still recruiting, according to their own FAQs, underage people to work for the church. And they're saying that it's okay because a parent said that they approve, and they are not making them work more than they are legally allowed to. But they are still living under conditions which I believe amount to modern slavery. If you're provided communal birthing, you're provided food and a weekly stipend of £50 a week, and you have to work 7 days a week, and you have no options outside of that, that is modern slavery. So they're admitting to it here. Before we move on, let's look at some of these comments I've been starring. Amber here. I used to babysit for Celebrity Centre Public so I could do my objectives. I literally had my 12th birthday on the EPF. The EPF being the boot camp for the Sea organisation. Joe here talking about if a Sea Org member got pregnant, then they had to get rid of the baby. Absolutely. And I believe that is still something that occurs. Alrighty. There's some really good comments here. And Amber, I would love to hear more about your story. If you want to email me on hello@apostatealex.com, I would love to hear more about your story if you'd be willing to share it. You don't have to come on the channel if you don't want to, but I'd be interested to know what life was like for you. Okay, so to confirm that kids are still being recruited to work for Scientology and the Sea Organization, here are some pictures that were published by St. Hill recently, which is, again, the Church of Scientology's UK headquarters, which very clearly shows 3 children holding signs saying, "I'm joining the Sea Org." These pictures, as you can see by the fact that it says LRH birthday celebration on the top there, were taken in the last couple of weeks. L. Ron Hubbard's birthday was March 13th. So as of this month, Scientology are promoting the fact that they have got children to sign 1 billion year contracts dedicating their eternity to working for the organization. Now, we've talked about kids working for Scientology and the Sea Organization. Why don't we look at some of the policy letters that talk about children in the Sea Org? Now, these are what are known as flag orders. Now, there are different types of policy letters in Scientology. We're not going to get into the weeds about all of them, but, flag orders are the ones we're talking about here, and they are specific to members of the Sea Organization. And I've put them in date order. There are lots of flag orders. I've just picked out the ones that are relevant to what we're talking about here. Amber here, can someone say that email address again? Yes, it's hello@apostatealex.com. Amy here, it would be interesting if the parents are divorced. Well, funny you should say that, because we are going to be talking about a case related to divorced parents and Scientology kids later on. But before we do that, let's talk about kids working for Scientology and these flag orders. We're not going to read every single one of these word for word because there are a lot of them. I just wanted to share some snippets and let you know that they are out there. This is a Sea Org flag order. Children. November 1967. Now remember that on Scientology's FAQs on their website, they said that there were no children in the Sea Organization until 1976 because they were on board the ship and there were no kids on the ship. Well, why then was L. Ron Hubbard writing a policy letter in 1967 about children? 1967, he was on the ship. Children. Children are to be fed a half hour before standard meal times. Their nannies are responsible for serving them and arranging meals. During all hands evolutions at sea and in port, the children's nannies are responsible to see they do not get in the way of the ship's normal duties and are well cared for, given tight schedules and interesting constructive Scientology programs. So L. Ron Hubbard here is ordering children to have tight schedules and to not get in the way of the ship's operation. However, Scientology say there were no kids on the ship. So a bit of a contradiction there. Let's look at this one here. This is a policy called Sea Org Children, written the following year, January 1968. Sea Org children are crew. When new, they have the rank of swamper. When more experienced, they have the rank of deckhand or steward. They must be separately berthed from student and other children. They have a uniform allowance. They are senior to and take charge of student and guest children who must obey them. So children here are being given authority to command and order other kids around the ship. Now, I'd like to just pause here and remind everybody what Scientology's belief is when it comes to children. In Scientology, you are an immortal spiritual being called a Thetan. You have lived millions of lives before, and you will live millions of lives again in the future. Therefore, the age of your body is meaningless because you are this millions of year old spiritual being. So Scientology's belief, therefore, is that children are adults stuck in small bodies. So the treatment of a child is expected to be the same as the treatment of an adult because you're the same age as me. You're just in a small children's body. So this is why L. Ron Hubbard. That's how he's justifying giving children, long work hours, tasks, responsibility, and that sort of thing. Because he's not seeing kids as kids. He's seeing them as adults in small bodies. Excuse me. This is another policy from 1968. Children are beings and are to be treated as such. When they work in the division of the org and come under the Sea Org Master at Arms, just like any other Sea Org member, they're given posts, stand watches, and are provided uniforms. So that just provides evidence of what I just said about children being treated like adults. Cadets, children designation 1968. Any child who has passed his staff status 2 and AB or engine room check sheet and has a post which he is holding in the Sea Org and who has a good ethics record is hereafter to be referred to not in a generality of children but as a cadet. The word children is not to be used to describe those as it is a generality. Children are people who have not passed the check sheets. The title of cadet is what we are going to be using. So cadets is a child. Here's a policy on school hours. It's talking about children's having to have playtime, although playtime is not a requirement. They are more than willing to do their jobs and will, just give them a chance. This is the schedule. They have duties to perform and are on regular Sea Org hours. Now, regular Sea Org hours at the time of recording this is 9 a.m. till 10 p.m. 7 days a week. And back then, it was the same, I understand, or even earlier and later. But full Sea Org hours for all cadets, all children. 1968, every Sea Org member must be included in the WQSB and Org board regardless. Don't worry too much about what those things mean, but what the next sentence is what's important. Age 6 and above. Now, if L. Ron Hubbard did not have kids age 6 or below on the ship, why would he need to specify age 6 and above? This policy only applies to people age 6 and above. And yet Scientology say that there were no kids on the ship. But again, further evidence that there were children in the Sea Org and they are to be treated as adults. This is a policy talking about cadets and the living conditions, younger children, being upset and so on. It's talking here about if a child misbehaves or something, the nursery, the person who's looking after the kids, is going to be punished for the kids' bad behavior, essentially. There's a post here called Governess. It's talking about it's the specifics here. Children may not smoke or possess matches. Children may only go on liberty. That means have a day off. with the permission of the conning officer. I don't know what post that is, and only accompanied by an adult. So children can have time off if they're accompanied by someone and they have permission. Children must spend at least 10 hours a day studying. If a child or these children are found in Hold 1 or any hidden compartment of the ship, they are to be locked up. L. Ron Hubbard here, ordering children to be locked up. Family Day, it's talking here about the problem with Sea Org members who have children. So he's establishing a thing called Family Day. Family Day is established as the first Sunday of June each year. The purpose of Family Day is to bring young Sea Org members and children of Sea Org parents even closer to their parents. So essentially, there was an issue because kids were complaining they're not getting to see their parents because they were in the Sea Org and working elsewhere, and these parents were complaining they weren't seeing their children. So what L. Ron Hubbard did is said, okay, on this one day, once a year, Sea Org members who have kids can go and see their children. One day a year. However, even that is conditional because it says here that you have to have upstats. For example, where is the quote here? A dinner and festivities held important. These holidays occur. Or it might be another policy letter. But nonetheless, this only applies to Sea Org members whose stats are up. Here is a checklist for a pre-cadet. So back in the day, if you were a kid and you were going to join the Sea Org and you were going to be a cadet, you have to, do this checklist before you're allowed to be a cadet. And it's, for example, can the kid properly wash their hands and face, brush their teeth, and so on, right? Fair enough. I understand why there are basic requirements for somebody to join staff. Can they look after themselves? Can they tie their shoelaces and so on? Make my own bed, right? Do they understand the basics of things like numbers, the alphabet, clothing, furniture, cooking, and so on? But the thing that is missing from this check sheet is parental consent. At no point on this checklist does it stipulate that the parents of the children have to agree to having their kids on staff. It's just about whether the child is competent and able to fulfill the working requirements of a Sea Org member. It is attested by the nanny, the person who is looking after the child. That is a post that was given by the Sea organization. So you can't join the Sea Org unless the nanny signs off on it. But if your parent doesn't like it, nothing to say here that the parent can veto that decision or is even consulted on it. And here is another policy letter on cadets. It's talking about the Cadet Org program. And we covered this earlier. A child who possesses staff status 2 is considered a cadet. And therefore, I think the important thing here is it says age is not a consideration here. We are only interested in the abilities gained. So L. Ron Hubbard only cares about whether the child can fulfill his duties and obligations as a staff member, whether they can do the job, rather than are they of a certain age? Are they able, for example, to consent? Are they old enough to understand what they're getting themselves into, what they are signing? That doesn't matter. All that matters is, can he do the job? So those are the policies when it comes to staff members and children in the Sea Org. Now, we're going to look now at a couple of things to do with the United Kingdom. That's where I'm based. And it's interesting to look at government and legal rulings. Before we do, let's look at some of these comments I've been starring as we're going through. Peter here saying Janice Gilgrady was how old when she was on the ship as a messenger? I believe she was 8 or 9 or something, 10 maybe. Danielle, who was in the chat earlier, was at the age of 7, I believe, on the ship. New year, new name. Is holding children in a ship's chain locker just the nanny keeping the children out of harm from working on a ship No, because the chain locker is one of the most dangerous places on the ship for a child to be, because if they drop the anchor, this massive chain goes swirling around and could kill somebody. Ed here saying, "Hi Alex from Denver, Colorado. I watched Clara Marks on the subject, and I'm appalled that they are getting the children indoctrinated and imprisoned in the cult for life." Absolutely. Lots of very pertinent comments I'm seeing in the chat here. I'm not going to bring them all up. However, they are all important and valid. Claire said when she complained she was labelled banky. Yeah, I was labelled banky when I was complained about something. I was upset about something. I was told, stop being banky. No H-E-N-R, human emotion and a reaction. Okay. So, in 1971, the UK government started an inquiry into the practices and effects of Scientology. It resulted in what's called the Foster Report. Now, the Foster Report is a very lengthy document. Essentially, the government analysed not just Scientology as an organization, but how Scientology operates, what it does, the practice of Scientology, the auditing, the belief system, and the effects of those things on people. It is a very lengthy document that I do plan on going through step by step, bit by bit, in a number of live streams in the future. But it was telling because it really looked in great detail at things like auditing, the ethics program, fair game, not just the belief system, but the practice of Scientology and how it affects people. And one of its conclusions was that the practice of Scientology is harmful to children. Now, the 1971 Foster Report remains in standing to this day. This is the view of the government back then. There are certain things that happened afterwards in terms of regulating psychotherapy and so on as a result of the Foster Report, but a lot of action was never taken and still hasn't been taken to this day. But this report has never been overturned or repealed by the government. The government have never taken it back and said, no, we don't think this or agree with this anymore. We take it back. It's invalid. None of that. This report still stands as a government report based on an inquiry into Scientology. And here's what it said about children. Let me just move my screen here so we can see it a little better. Here we go. The government are satisfied, having reviewed all the available evidence, that Scientology is socially harmful. It alienates members of families from each other and attributes squalid and disgraceful motives to all who oppose it. Its authoritarian principles and practice are a potential menace to the personality and well-being of those so deluded as to become its followers. Above all, its members its methods can be a serious danger to the health of those who submit to them. There is evidence that children are now being indoctrinated. So there we have it. In 1971, the UK government found that Scientology, the practice of Scientology, is harmful to one's health and raised concerns about children doing Scientology. Nothing happened. There were no rulings or actions taken by the government, no safeguarding policies, procedures, frameworks implemented. Nothing was done about it. And that is why Scientology is still carrying on the way that it did back then to this day. And they are still indoctrinating children through these new kids courses that we saw at the beginning of the video. Now, fast forward a few years to 1984. And this is where Amy's comment earlier about it would be interesting if the parents were divorced, where this comment comes into play. Because in 1984, there was a high court case here in the UK that was to do with the custody of a children. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of the specific divorce and custody battle. It's a very lengthy argument. But what I do know is one of the parents was a Scientologist, one of the parents was not, or was disaffected, or didn't like Scientology. And essentially, the parent who was not a Scientologist was trying to get custody of the children and say that it is unfair for them to be under the care of the parent who's a Scientologist because they'll be forced to do Scientology, and that is dangerous and harmful, and it's therefore best for the children for the custody to not be solely belonging to the parent who's a Scientologist. It was a landmark High Court case, and the ruling, as I said, covers many bases, but it does go in detail into Scientology's practices, its beliefs, and so on. And I've highlighted a couple of key parts of the ruling that relate to children that I wanted to bring up and share with you here. So this is available online. It is called the Leahy ruling because the judge who made the ruling was called Mr. Justice Leahy. He later then became a Lord, so Lord Leahy. Re B&G Minors Custody, High Court Family Division, 23rd of July 1984. Let's forward here to the parts that I have highlighted as relevant. Okay. So this is the view of the judge here. Scientology must come first before family or friends. Much evidence has been given and not disputed of how it leads to alienation of one spouse from another, of alienation from children and from friends. Another witness, Mrs. B, was a Scientologist from 1972 and rose quickly in the organization. She had a 3-year-old daughter. Nonetheless, for a period of months, she was required to work from 8:30 a.m. to 1 a.m. She was allowed only 15 minutes daily to put her daughter to bed. On one occasion, when the child broke her arm and she took her to the doctor, she was directed to work all night as a penalty. It's talking here about parents being told to do 12-hour physical work days. The work aggravated a chronic back condition. When she protested, she was threatened with being declared a suppressive person, which is a high crime. Her time with her children was limited to 1 half-hour per day. So the judge here is talking about a parent of a kid in Scientology. The parent is a SEAL member, and Scientology were using the time that parent had with their child against them. They were turning that into a punishment. Scientology had control over how much time the parent could spend with their child, and they then restricted that time as punishment when the parent had an accident or got sick. Another witness worked at FLAG, Scientology's headquarters over in Clearwater, Florida, and became L. Ron Hubbard's public relations officer, one of only 3 in the world, and a high appointment. In 1977, she declined to undertake a mission that would cause her to leave her young daughter for at least 2 months. She was shouted at and abused because she put the care of her child first. She was subjected to a committee of evidence, which is a disciplinary tribunal in Scientology, and she left FLAG. Alrighty, let's carry on with this ruling. The judge talks about Scientology's indoctrination of children, and the judge ruled the objective of Scientology is to capture the child and its mind. It then quotes child Dianetics, which we talked about earlier, and then it also talks about Dr. Clark. Dr. Clark was I believe, an expert witness, a specialist, I think a psychiatrist, who was called in to testify in this case. And the judge says, Dr. Clark says, among children's many development needs is the capacity to deal with strangers and diverse interests. A child brought up strictly within the closed system of Scientology would tend not to develop these capacities and instead look upon the non-cleared outside world as a totally alien culture. The technical processes used by Scientology to educate children are mind-focusing, hypnotic, and anesthetic. Such states of mind, which are induced in order to secure lifetime allegiance to Scientology, can mask real disease. Children need human nurturance from human, that is to say, fallible models, in order to become autonomous and adaptive over a lifetime. The experience of stressful and manipulative Scientology training not only consumes a great deal of time unconstructively, but it favors identification with the process rather than with human potential authorities. Then the judge goes on to say, in my judgment, that technique has been worked out and is operated, talking about the Scientology procedure of thought control. I agree with Dr. Clark that Scientology training is training for slavery. Dr. Clark adds, children also become damaged pawns in family conflicts as a result of Scientology policy, which teaches people how to manipulate others. One sees the untoward effects of this policy within the family home when the group works to alienate a child from a spouse who has incurred the church's disapproval and who must be shunned by any means available. A prescribed tactic often used to this effect is called third partying, by which a child can be subtly alienated from a parent who may not be acceptable to the Church of Scientology by blaming problems and conflicts on the non-conforming spouse or other close family members. Apart from direct physical damage, a most significant result of this process is that the child loses half of his parental nurturance. This is the judge speaking now, there is a large, very large body of evidence, most of it undisputed in this case, supporting Dr. Clark's analysis, and I am left in no doubt that he is right. In the conclusion, the judge goes on to say Scientology is corrupt, sinister, and dangerous. It is corrupt because it is based on lies and deceit and has as its real objective money and power for Mr. Hubbard, his wife, and those close to him at the top. It is sinister because it indulges in infamous practices both to its adherents who do not toe the line unquestionably and to those outside who criticize or oppose it. It is dangerous because it is out to capture people, especially children and impressionable young people, and indoctrinate and brainwash them so they become the unquestioning captives and tools of the cult, withdrawn from ordinary thought, living, and relationships with others. It is, of course, the children's personalities and individualities and their freedom of choice to grow up as normal young people, which is the cause for concern. In his affidavit, sworn on the 14th of June, a father deposed, there is no effort or attempt on my part to indoctrinate the children with the beliefs of Scientology, although there must be a natural rubbing off on them of certain facets of my beliefs, and it is my beliefs that all my children should be free to make up their own minds about Scientology, blah, blah, blah. And the judge outright says, this is not true. There is more than one way of forcing. The judge goes on to say, if they were to remain with the father and stepmother without conditions, the process would go on with all the consequences to the children earlier described, including inevitably and ultimately alienation from their mother. It would be nothing short of disastrous for them. The baleful influence of the church would in reality still be there, and the children would remain gravely at risk. It then goes on to say, I have taken that course deliberately because essentially in this judgment, the judge included loads of Scientology evidence. It's a very lengthy ruling, and he explains why. He says, I've taken that course deliberately. The church resorts to lies and deceit whenever it thinks it will profit it to do so. So he's included all of these quotes and policies and documents and so on in the ruling itself to make it harder for Scientology to claim that their practices have changed or they're wrong or whatever. He's included it in the actual judgment itself. But this ruling is pretty damning for Scientology, and it happened in 1984. Scientology has continued to operate in the UK free from government scrutiny in exactly the same way it did back then to this day. Scientology slips through the cracks of safeguarding frameworks. For example, there is no mandatory reporting here in the UK for religious ministers who are aware of child SA and that sort of thing. There is no recognition of spiritual or ritual abuse within the safeguarding framework provided by the government. And there is certainly no form of justice for those who were abused or harmed as children within Scientology here in the UK. Many people I know who were harmed as children in Scientology and have reported it to the police have said there's nothing the police can do because it's historic. Now, in my mind, it doesn't matter when it happened. If you were harmed or abused, you should be given the opportunity to seek justice. Whether or not it's historic, it's wrong, and Scientology should be held to account for that. So I wanted to bring all of this to your attention in the context of the fact that Scientology have just published a ream of new courses specifically geared at indoctrinating children. They are revamping their efforts at recruiting and indoctrinating kids, and I think we as a community need to revamp our efforts to raise awareness of the harms Scientology does to children. And these two documents, the Foster Report and the Leahy ruling, are integral because they're not just the opinions or thoughts of ex-Scientologists or what Scientology might call bitter apostates. This is a legal ruling by a High Court judge and an inquiry by the UK government. These two things are significant. They hold a lot of weight. And yes, they were a long time ago, but they are unchanged. They remain the same to this day. So, if you're watching this and you're in the UK, I'd like to ask you for a favour. Please do contact your local Member of Parliament. You can do that by email. If you Google who is my local MP, there's a form on the government website. Type in your postcode, it tells you who your MP is. You can email them. If you Google your MP, their page will come up on the House of Parliament website, and you can email them and say, I'm a constituent in your constituency, or I'm a resident in your constituency. Here's my address. You have to give them your address. Ask your MP whether they would consider meeting with you to discuss your concerns around safeguarding frameworks in the UK, the Foster Report, and the harm Scientology does to children. There are lots of things that the MP can do to help, but just ask the question, would they agree to meet? And if the MP comes back and says yes, and you'd like me to come and help you or be there or support you or be a part of that meeting, I will travel anywhere in the UK to support you in that meeting with your MP. Just drop me an email, let me know the date and the place, and I will be there. And I can also send you these documents. I can send you the proposed amendment to legislation that I'm trying to work on at the moment that would enable survivors to seek justice and minimize future harm. You don't have to have me there. I can give you all this stuff and you can go and present it to your MP yourself. But if you need that support, I will happily do that. If you're not in the UK, there are things you can do in your own country. If you're in the US, you can write to your local state representative or member of Congress. And you could use rulings and decisions that have been made in the US as well. This is not a case of religious freedom and people having the freedom to practice Scientology. This is a case of the behaviors and practices. This is a case of people doing things to other people that cause harm. We're not asking people to review whether believing in Scientology should be restricted. We're asking people to look at the practice, the behaviors, the impact of practicing those beliefs on people. It's actions, not beliefs. And that's really, really important. We're not trying to shut down people's freedom of belief. We're trying to shut down the abuse and harm to children. So I hope this was insightful for you all and you did find this interesting, and I've given you some information that you may find helpful in your own endeavors when it comes to highlighting the abuse and harm Scientology does against children. This is a very, very important topic and I will be talking more about it. But because Scientology are raising the game, raising the level when it comes to promoting to children, we need to do the same. We need to up our efforts and do what we can to raise awareness of the abuses and harms and why children doing Scientology is not okay. Let's just have a look and see if there are any comments that I've missed here. Amy here saying, I don't have that much faith in family court judges in America. Fair enough, but don't be disheartened. You can still write to your state representative. The worst thing that will happen is they'll reply and say no, but at least you've tried. D here saying, well done, Judge. Absolutely. Champagne Hand, is there a statute of limitations for this in the UK if someone who was harmed as a child wanted to come forward now? I'm not a legal expert or a lawyer, but my understanding is no, there are no statutes of limitations in the UK for harms and child SA, that sort of thing. It just becomes harder to prove when it comes to the police if it's historic. But you have to remember, Scientology keep records of everything. It's all in your PC folders, your ethics files, there are reports, and they are never destroyed. So doesn't matter when it happened to you in the UK, could have been 50 years ago. If it did, there will be a record of it in Scientology's folders and files. And even if we can't get a hold of those through a court warrant, for example, or a police warrant, it is something that still happened to you, and you absolutely should still report it to the police. The more people who report that they were harmed by this organization to the police, the more likely it is the police will see the pattern of behavior over the years and then might be able to take a broader action against the organization itself, even if nothing comes of your personal specific case. But I hope that it does, and I do encourage you to report crimes to the police. Music Maven, is ABC Mouse and the Age of Learning a sneaky way to include Scientology practices and flashy online learning for children? Yes, ABC Mouse is an organization that, I think it still is run by a very wealthy Scientology donor. And absolutely, if you have paid for that, if you've used it, you are supporting the Church of Scientology, because although the company isn't owned by the church, it's owned by a Scientologist who makes money off it, who then sends that money to Scientology. Joe here is saying that adults are avoiding Scientology like the plague. There we go. Champagne Hand saying, that's Ace Alex, you are good. Thank you, but it's a team effort, and we can only do this if we work together as a community. So please, please, please write to your state representative, your member of parliament, and just tell them you're concerned. And most importantly, you have to give them an action. Don't just say, here's my concerns. I mean, you can do that, but I have found it most successful when you say, here are my concerns and here's what I want to do about it. And the action is to ask for a meeting, because you just want to sit down with them in person or over Zoom or Teams or whatever for 15, 20 minutes, where you can discuss your concerns with your elected official and then present some suggestions as to what can be done about it. And that will give you a window of opportunity to discuss things like legislative change, safeguarding frameworks, that sort of thing. If you stick all of that in one long email, it's highly likely the MP or elected official will look at it and go, great, thank you, I've considered that, and nothing will happen. Whereas if you send a shorter email that says, I'd like to meet with you because I've got these concerns, can you meet with me and talk about it as my elected official? Usually they'll say, yes, come along to a surgery on this date, or yes, I'm free on this date, come and meet me, or do a Zoom call or whatever. And that opens the door for you to actually have face-to-face time with the MP. And you can say, great, now I've got you and I've got your interest. Here is the legislation that I think needs to be changed. What can you do to support me in that? And that opens the door to the conversation. So please do that if you want to help. And of course, as I said earlier, if you were the victim, if you have been a survivor of any of these sorts of things, of abuse, of harm, of neglect, anything like that, please report it to the police without delay. And I hope that you do seek justice and you are able to find justice. Now, finally, before I wrap up, because I have now been going for over an hour, I did say it was going to be a bit of a deep dive. I am working on something with regard to increasing the government scrutiny and taking action and campaigning for the legislative change here in the UK that we need to stop further harm from happening. And the thing that we need most is survivor stories, testimonies, written accounts of what happened to you in Scientology here in the UK. It doesn't matter how insignificant you may feel your story is, even if you lived in America and you came to Scientology, St. Hill in the 70s for an event once, and you saw Sea Org members working long work hours, long days, or you saw Sea Org members running around in boiler suits on the RPF, and that's the extent of your UK experience, that's okay. Please do submit that as a story, because survivor stories is what gives this gravity and what gives this momentum and what will empower elected officials to make the change that we need. So the more stories we have, however small, however short, however insignificant you may think they all go in together and add context as to the scale and the breadth of the problem, and demonstrates why this is a wide-reaching issue and why action needs to be taken. So if you were in Scientology in the UK, however short, however long ago, please do consider writing in with your survivor story. You can do so anonymously. You don't have to put your name on it if you don't want to. You can do this just by giving your initials or by giving no name whatsoever. But I have created a Google form here called UK Survivor Stories. And it's very simple. When did your story happen? Where did it occur? Were you public staff or Sea Org? How old were you? And then write your story. It can be as long or as short as you like. And then it asks a few questions about have you reported it to law enforcement and if you would like to be anonymous. And if not, you can put your name in there. So please do. I'll put the link to this in the description of the video after the live stream finishes. Please fill out this form, send in your story, because what I will do is I'll take these all compiled and give them to those who make change, policymakers, those who write the laws, members of parliament. And I can say, look, it's not just me. All of these people have all of these experiences, and we as a collective are concerned, and we need you to take action. So I'll put the link to that in the description of this video. If you don't want to use the form, you can email it in hello@apostatealex.com. And again, you can choose whether you're happy for me to publish the story on my blog, Scientologybusiness.com, or whether you don't want it published, but you're just happy for it to be shared with members of parliament privately, or you don't want it shared at all. And you can choose to put your name on it or not, completely up to you. What's important is the stories and the content of those stories. So that's it from me for now, guys. Thank you so much. If you want to support the channel and the activism I've been doing, please consider using the PayPal or Buy Me a Coffee links in the description, and send in a donation, because every little helps. I couldn't do this activism without your support as a community. So thank you in advance for everybody who does that. And if you want to support in a non-financial way, the best way of doing that is press the like button, press the subscribe button, hit the bell to get notifications when I go live. And if you see the little hype button under the video, hit that as well, because that tells the algorithm that people want to see this video and it pushes it out to more people. You may not have liked the content in terms of talking about children and what Scientology is doing to children, but the like button is representative of the video, of the message. You can like it or dislike it. It still counts as engagement. If you want to hype it, you're hyping the video, not the topic of the video, if that makes sense. So don't feel guilty about giving a cheers to a video talking about harms to children. You're giving a cheers to the fact that we're talking about it and spreading awareness. Thank you so much, guys. I will see you all on the next one.